I want you to picture a specific demographic. Just visualize them for a second.
Okay.
These are people who are woven into the absolute bedrock of our society. They are piloting the commercial flights you take to visit family. They are the, structural engineers signing off on the bridges you drive over.
Right.
They're combat veterans, high-level executives, factory workers, fathers, husbands. I mean, they are everywhere, in every tax bracket and every zip code.
Mm-hmm.
But here's the paradox. Despite being omnipresent, they are effectively invisible. They just don't exist in the stories we tell ourselves about who we are.
It really is a strange contradiction, isn't it? Usually, if a group is that widespread, culture develops a shorthand for them.
Yeah, script.
We have a script. We know where they fit. But in this case, we have a group that is either actively erased or when they are seen, they're distorted so badly they're unrecognizable.
Today, we're doing a deep dive into a topic that I think is going to challenge a lot of the sort of default settings we all carry around in our heads. We're digging into source material titled, Why Straight Crossdressers Rarely See Themselves Represented. And right there in the title, you hit this immediate friction point. We're talking about heterosexual men, guys who are attracted to women, who identify as men, who also have this deep-seated, often lifelong need to wear women's clothing.
Right.
And the core tension isn't just, this is who I am, it's the external confusion of, why does the world pretend no one else is like me?
We aren't just talking about fashion or fabric. I mean, if we just talk about clothes, we miss the point entirely.
Totally.
We need to unpack something much deeper about, human psychology and how our society functions. We're looking at how our culture has this desperate craving for what the source calls clean, linear identity narratives. We want human beings to make sense instantly. We want to look at someone and just know their whole story. And straight crossdressers, they're like a glitch in that system. They disrupt the narrative. And because they disrupt the story we want to hear, the culture responds with erasure, silence.
I want to stick on that idea of the linear narrative, because I think most of us don't even realize we're running a script in our heads until someone points it out.
You don't.
It's like breathing, you don't notice it until it gets difficult. Why is this specific group, straight men who cross-dress, so mechanically difficult for pop culture to process?
Well, think about the stories regarding gender that we've finally become comfortable with over the last, say, 20 years. Modern culture has arguably become much more accepting, which is fantastic, but it has locked on to a very specific arc. It goes like this. Confusion, followed by realization, followed by coming out. It's the hero's journey applied to gender.
Sure. It's a classic 3-act structure. A man feels feminine, struggles with it in Act 1. Act 2, he realizes, oh, I understand now I'm actually gay or I'm transgender. And then Act 3 is the transition or the public declaration. The credits roll, everyone applauds. Resolution.
That storyline is valid. It is vital. But the problem arises when that becomes the only available storyline. It crowds out all other possibility. We have been trained to think that if a man embraces femininity, he is on a journey from point A to point B. He is moving from man to woman or from straight to gay.
But the straight crossdresser isn't moving from A to B.
They're staying at point A, but they're redecorating it. And that drives people crazy. They introduce ambiguity where people desperately want certainty. They prove that femininity doesn't automatically determine your sexual orientation. They prove that gender expression doesn't always mean you need a new identity label. And honestly, people don't know what to do with that information. It feels unresolved.
It's like the culture is waiting for the other shoe to drop. You see this in casual conversation. If a guy admits to this, the reaction is often, okay, but when are you going to really tell us? Like, come on, finish the transition, or just admit you like men.
Exactly. Because they don't move toward that expected conclusion, their experience is viewed as unfinished. It's seen as a phase that's dragging on too long, or it's seen as invalid. The force argues that culture actually prefers erasure to ambiguity. We would rather pretend these men don't exist than do the heavy mental lifting of understanding someone who refuses to fit in the boxes we built.
So if we don't see the reality, the guy who mows his lawn and loves his wife and also wears skirts, what do we see? Because I feel like I have seen men in dresses in movies and TV my whole life. It's not like the image is banned. It's actually kind of common.
You're right, the image isn't banned, but it is strictly controlled. The source identifies a few very specific tropes, almost like containment fields, that we allow these characters to exist in. If you see a man in a dress, he is almost guaranteed to fall into one of 3 categories. And the first one is the most obvious, the punchline.
Oh, absolutely. The sitcom trope, the bachelor party gone wrong, the slapstick comedy where a tough guy has to put on a floral dress to hide from the mob or spy on his ex-wife.
But think about the mechanics of that joke. Why are we laughing?
Right.
When we see a man in women's clothes in a comedy, the humor is entirely built on discomfort and exaggeration. The audience is laughing because, look how absurd this is. Look how humiliating this is for him. The humor relies on the fact that he shouldn't be doing it.
It's true. He's never walking confidently. He's usually stumbling in heels. His chest hair is sticking out. His makeup is smeared like a clown.
Exactly.
The whole point is that he is bad at it and he hates it.
And that's the key. In those roles, the character isn't really straight and he isn't gay. He's just humiliated. The source points out that in these portrayals, desire and self-understanding are completely stripped away. We aren't seeing a man who enjoys the femininity. We are seeing a man who is being punished by it. It reinforces the subtle social cue that femininity on a male body is inherently ridiculous. It tells the viewer, don't do this or you become the joke.
So that's the comedy angle, the harmless buffoon. But the source mentions darker tropes too, the ones that aren't funny at all.
Right. There's the trope of the deceiver. This is where the crossdresser is a villain. He's hiding something dangerous. Think of the classic psychological thriller where the killer wears a wig. In this narrative, if the man likes women, his attraction isn't seen as love. It's coded as manipulative, false, or a trap. He's tricking the world.
That's actually terrifying when you apply it to real life. It links the identity directly to danger. But there was another one mentioned that felt a bit more modern, the waypoint.
This one feels like it comes from a place of good intentions, but it still misses the mark. The waypoint is fascinating because it feels progressive on the surface. This is when a story features a crossdresser, but only as a pit stop.
A phase.
A phase. The narrative frames the cross-dressing solely as a step on the road to being trans or gay.
So the implication is that if you stop at crossdresser, you failed the class. You didn't finish the journey.
Or that you're just lying to yourself. The underlying message is you are just delaying the truth. If a character enjoys femininity but doesn't transition, the audience feels like the story is incomplete. It implies that being a straight cross-dresser isn't a destination in itself. It's just a waiting room. You're sitting there reading magazines until the doctor calls you in for your real diagnosis.
Now, for the listener who actually is a straight crossdresser sitting on his couch watching these shows,
it's profoundly alienating. The source says these portrayals feel like mirrors that distort rather than reflect. You look for yourself and you see a joke, a villain, or someone who is confused.
You never just see yourself.
Never. A guy who pays his taxes, loves his wife, watches football, and wears a skirt on the weekend. That person is seemingly impossible in our media landscape.
This leads to a really difficult question about community. Because logically, if you don't fit into the mainstream straight box, you look to the LGBTQ plus community.
You'd think so.
They are the ones historically challenging gender norms. You would assume that would be a welcoming harbor.
You would think so. And I want to be clear, sometimes it is. There are plenty of welcoming individuals. But the source material describes the institutional relationship as an uneasy fit.
An uneasy fit.
And this is really nuanced. Historically, cross-dressing has been deeply tied to queer resistance and drag culture. Those are vital connections. But within many modern queer spaces, there's an operating assumption that femininity in men signals queerness. It is a signifier of belonging to that tribe.
So if a guy walks into a queer space in a dress and says, actually, I'm straight, I love my wife, I just like this dress, that creates friction.
It can be viewed with suspicion. It can be interpreted as denial. He might be encouraged to re-examine his sexuality, even if he already has done that work for years. The source notes that his heterosexuality might be viewed as aligning him with the dominant system, the straight world, rather than the marginalized one. He's seen as a tourist in a space meant for survival.
So he's enjoying the aesthetic without sharing the struggle.
That's the perception. He's enjoying the aesthetics of the culture without sharing the burden of the oppression associated with being gay or trans.
That is such a lonely position to be in. You're too weird for the straight world. You get beat up at a traditional sports bar, but you're too straight for the queer world.
The source calls it existing between communities. You belong fully to neither. And so where do they go? They turn to the internet. But the digital landscape is fragmented in a way that can be just as damaging.
Yeah, the breakdown of the online spaces was pretty bleak. It seemed like you have to pick your poison.
It is bleak. You have the fetish spaces, which focus almost entirely on sex and kink. If you go there, you learn that your identity is just a pornography category.
Right.
Then you have trans spaces where a straight cross-dresser might have their lack of dysphoria question people asking, are you sure you aren't just repressing it?
And then the relationship forums. I've stumbled onto these. The threads usually start with, my husband told me, and it spirals from there.
Those are heartbreaking. In those spaces, the cross-dressing is almost always framed as a problem to be managed. It's treated like a gambling addiction or a bad habit. It's rarely discussed as a valid part of the self that deserves understanding. It's, how do I stop him? How do I tolerate this?
You mentioned the fetish spaces just now. I want to circle back to that because I think that is the #1 assumption the general public makes. If a straight guy is wearing women's underwear, it must be sexual. It's a kink. End of story.
That is the fetish myth. And the expert breakdown of the source is really crucial here because it's nuanced. It acknowledges that, yes, for many men, arousal is an entry point.
Okay.
It can start there. Especially in puberty, everything gets tangled up with arousal. But outsiders stop the analysis right there. They think arousal is the entire architecture of the experience.
But the source says it goes deeper.
Much deeper. The source talks about feelings of calm, wholeness, vulnerability, creativity, emotional release. Think about the texture of men's clothing. It's rough, durable, utilitarian. It's armor. Now think about the texture of women's clothing, soft, delicate, flowing. For many of these men, the clothing allows them to access a part of their emotional spectrum that their masculine life doesn't allow.
That makes sense. If your day-to-day life is all about being tough, stoic, rigid, and reliable, the literal softness of the clothing might represent a softness of emotion, a break from having to be the man.
Exactly. It's a pressure valve. But when culture views it only through a fetish lens, it delegitimizes that emotion. It frames the femininity as a malfunction or a sexual indulgence rather than a legitimate form of self-expression. It tells these men, your feelings aren't real, only your arousal is. It reduces a complex identity down to a biological reflex.
Which brings us to the why. Why is this specific taboo so strong? I mean, women wear pants, women wear tuxedos. Why is the standard so different for men?
So we live in a society that, consciously or not, still values the masculine over the feminine. We associate masculine traits with power, logic, leadership, and competence. So when a woman adopts masculine traits, ambition, strength, or literally wearing trousers, she's seen as moving up the value hierarchy. She isn't losing her womanhood. She's adding to it. She's expanding her repertoire.
She's leaning in, so to speak. She's hacking the system to gain power.
Exactly. But for a man, the door locks behind him. If a man adopts feminine traits, he isn't seen as expanding. He is seen as abandoning masculinity because the feminine is still culturally coded as lesser or weaker or frivolous in the context of power dynamics. A man moving in that direction is viewed as a departure, a loss of status. He is voluntarily stepping down the ladder.
That is deeply depressing, actually. It implies that masculinity is so fragile that a silk blouse can destroy it.
It implies that masculinity is something you have to constantly defend. It's not something you are, it's something you do, and you can fail at it. The logic goes, if you embrace the feminine, you must be losing the masculine. And if you lose the masculine, you probably lose the heterosexual too. Straight cross-dressers contradict this logic. They hold both simultaneously. They are masculine and feminine. They are men, and they like pretty things. And culture just hasn't learned how to process that contradiction yet.
And the people who pay the price for that inability to process are the men, and crucially, their partners. We have to talk about the relationships, because if you are a straight man, presumably you want a relationship with a woman.
And this is where the lack of stories becomes tragic. The source highlights the missing stories. When we do hear about cross-dressers and their wives in media, it is almost always a catastrophe.
It's the shocked wife scene.
Yes. The wife walks in, screams, and packs a bag. End of marriage. That's the script. Or the wife tolerates it, but it's this shameful, dark secret they never speak about, the elephant in the room that drains the intimacy out of the marriage. In the fetish world, the wife becomes a dominatrix caricature who forces him to dress up.
Those are extreme ends of the spectrum. It's either tragedy or porn.
Exactly. What is missing? The middle. We lack stories of the slow human processes, the negotiation, the curiosity, the fear followed by reassurance, the ordinary couples who figure it out.
Right. I'm imagining the Tuesday night conversation. The kids are asleep. He says, I have something to tell you. And she says, okay, that's weird and I'm confused, but I love you, so let's have a glass of wine and talk about it.
Precisely. That conversation happens in real life all the time. Couples navigate this. Women buy their husbands' clothes, they bond over it. But because we never see that represented, men internalize the belief that honesty will inevitably destroy their relationships.
They believe it can't end any other way.
They believe that love and femininity cannot coexist for them.
It becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. You hide it because you think it destroys love, and the hiding is what actually destroys the intimacy.
Spot on. So what do? They stay silent, sometimes for decades. The source mentions men who live their entire lives with this part of themselves hidden purely because they have never seen a model of how to share it safely. They purge their clothes, they promise to stop, they binge, they purge again. It's a cycle of shame.
That brings us to the personal cost. We've talked about society, media, tropes. But down at the individual level, what does this invisibility do to a person's soul?
It creates a sense of being incoherent. That's the word the source uses, and I think is powerful. It feels like the math of your own life doesn't add up.
I'm a man, but I like this. I'm straight, but I don't fit the mold.
Right. And living with that incoherence leads to chronic secrecy and shame. It leads to a feeling of being fundamentally alone, even in a room full of people who love you. And some men respond by overperforming masculinity, just to throw people off the scent. Others just retreat inward. But the common thread is the belief that they are existing without permission.
So what is the solution here? Do we need a Marvel superhero who wears a skirt to save the world?
Perhaps. Well, I'd watch that, but no. The source argues that representation doesn't need heroes. It needs nuance. It needs boredom, almost.
Boredom.
We need stories of men who are happily heterosexual and feminine without rushing to a label. We need to see that it's possible to be a devoted husband, a competent professional, and also enjoy wearing a dress without the sky falling.
It's about expanding the imagination of what a straight man can look like.
Exactly. It doesn't undermine trans or gay experiences. It actually enriches the whole landscape. It acknowledges that gender is messy and human and doesn't always fit into a clean box. It tells us that you can add to your identity without subtracting from it. You can be a man plus femininity, not a man minus masculinity. The source left me with this phrase: existing without permission. Straight crossdressers are doing that every day. But it raises a really provocative question for all of us. If we accepted that identity doesn't have to be resolved into a clean category to be real, we accepted ambiguity, how many other invisible people would suddenly appear in plain sight?